The state of Indiana and its governor, Mike Pence, have come under fire as of late by progressive, anti-religious activists. Why? Because the governor dared to introduce a religious freedom law that many find discriminatory. I'm a big fan of this law, and I think you should be too, because it gives recourse to a religious individual to be able to go to a court and challenge someone who is demanding a service or a product of them that they feel violates their religious beliefs. So this got me thinking, what is a right? What is a law? What is the government's role in protecting our rights, specifically the right of freedom of religion, a right that is so fundamental. It is the first mention in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is the first right mentioned in the American Bill of Rights. It is the first right mentioned in the Magna Carta. It is so fundamental. And so I'm here with Dr. Joe Boot to talk about this. He's written about the meaning of freedom in his latest book, The Mission of God. Joe, thank you for being here. Let me start by asking you why you think this law is important.
Well, I think the law is critically important right now because we're in a time in the Western world where we're seeing a transition from religious freedom or freedom of religion to freedom of worship only, where the state is increasingly burdening religious people, especially Christian people, in such a way that any sort of public expression or living out the practical reality of their faith in day-to-day life is being censured.
And in Indiana, what we're seeing is there is a false narrative, I would say, that this law will be used by Christians to harm gays. So where do you strike that balance between protecting religious rights and minority rights?
The sensitive issue of balancing religious freedom and so-called minority rights is a huge problem for the modern Western state. And it's difficult to go into the nature of that difficulty, but the problem is that no social order can create a neutral space. That is that every law, every government, every social order is committed to a certain consensus. And that the law order, the social order, the education, the state itself will reflect that social consensus. And so in balancing these things, the difficulty that all legislators and courts are facing is they're all the time feeling like they're in the court of public opinion. What do people think about this? What do they make of this? What is more important? Protecting a homosexual couple from and their right to have any photographer they want or baker they want, or a Christian who is quite ready to bake a cake for somebody but doesn't want to participate in the wedding. So I think that we are at a point where you can have a live and let live mentality. This law does nothing to threaten people of what the modern state calls with minority rights from living in freedom. What is being restricted is the Christian's ability to live and conduct business in freedom. That's what's being removed, and that points to the sinister character of what's taking place.
Right, and yet, based on what you've just said, Mike Pence, rather than doubling down, is backing down. And as we just talked about, said he would be open to amending the law. So what does that say, Joe? What does that say? Does that suggest that there's some sort of discriminatory nature about this law that needs to be amended? Or is that more comment on the political atmosphere?
Well, it's precisely, as you say, the issue there is that the court of public opinion is now dictating to the governor how he's going to respond. This has nothing to do with the discriminatory character of this law. This law exists in 19 other states, or a similar one in 19 other states in the US. President Clinton signed something very similar into being in 1993 at the federal level. Even Obama signed something similar in Illinois when he was state senator there. So what you're seeing is what's changed since 93 and 2015. Well, in that 20-year intervening period, all that's happened is the advance of cultural Marxism, or what you call political correctness, is made considerable ground, especially in the court of public opinion. And what I'm saying with respect to the public space is that the new religion will not tolerate Christianity.
Right.
And that is what is very clear in these instances, is that there is not a live and let live attitude. such an attitude can't be maintained in these people's minds. It has to be the person who objects to these things cannot be allowed to express that objection in any way.
And that political correctness and progressivism has injected its place into our laws the United States is not exclusive to this. We're seeing it happen in Canada with Trinity Western University. This is an instance where the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, where we spoke about in the beginning, is serving as a sword, not a shield.
Yes, the historic protection of law in the Western world, it's the primary purpose of divisions of power, the way in which the constitutions of the Western world have operated typically has been to protect people from an overbearing government. Because the greatest threat to individual liberty is always an overbearing government that moves in a totalitarian or dictatorial, tyrannical direction. And what we're seeing right now in Canada is activist judges, activist lawyers, and unaccountable tribunals seeking to enforce a new orthodoxy, and oftentimes illegally. In terms of the law tradition and structure of our own country here in Canada. So in the case of TWU, of course, on the one hand, in the court of public opinion, TWU's already been penalized and punished, because what student is now going to seek out a law degree, what if that school comes into being from TWU, knowing that they're immediately going to be potentially restricted from practicing law in a number of provinces in Canada. And whenever we see this hierarchy of rights come up in the courts in Canada today, it is invariably the case that freedom of religion loses against the minority rights. Catholic schools, for example, that have to allow a young man to come with his boyfriend to the prom. Or take Alberta, for example. The government of Alberta has now passed a requirement that schools, public and private, Christian, religious, whatever they may be, must permit gay, straight alliances in the schools. So in private institutions. Now, if that's not the destruction of freedom, I don't know what is. We are steadily surrendering historic freedom and liberty in the name of social justice, which is a foil. It's merely a mask for tyranny.
What do you predict will happen going forward? Last question.
Well, the way things look at the present time is that I think unless there is a very significant mainstream, what I would call grassroots resistance from ordinary Canadians, ordinary Americans to these things, we're going to see the growth of tyranny and the increasing reduction of freedom. The free space is being squashed all of the time, and the Christian conviction is that it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. If the Son sets you free, the Bible says you'll be free indeed. And the history of the Western world has been that under the rule of law, in the Christian tradition, people have enjoyed freedom, a maximum degree of freedom under the rule of law. What we've seen in Canada is, first of all, a change of sovereign, a change of God concept, basically. And when you see changes in the law taking place like this, what's happening is we've changed gods. All that's being fleshed out in the law and in the schools and in the public sphere right now is a reflection of that change of religion, at least in the amongst the governmental elite. And that new religion is being forced on the people. And increasingly, I believe that the future is very, very challenging for religious freedom in Canada, unless people like you and others continue to stir perhaps a silent and quiet mainstream that haven't yet spoken up and really made their voice heard on these issues, to push back and say, no, we insist on our historic right to be free.
All right, Joe, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for your time.